Let's look at the polling on the Voice. You've got another bit of polling today, a separate survey that you've obtained, but no better news for the Yes Vote campaign.
That's right. Sky News has obtained polling showing that more Australians believe colonisation was, on the whole, a good thing for Indigenous people than it was a bad thing, although most Australians also believe Aboriginal people have suffered intergenerational trauma from settlement. Those polled by Resolve were presented with recent controversial comments by No campaigner and Indigenous Affairs spokeswoman for the opposition, Jacinta Price, when she said that colonisation had been a good thing overall for Indigenous people.
Do you believe the history of colonisation continues to have an impact on some Indigenous Australians?
No. I'll be honest with you, no, I don't think so. Positive impact, absolutely. I mean, now we've got running water, we've got readily available food. I mean, everything that my grandfather had when he was growing up, because he first saw whitefellas in his early adolescence, we now have.
You don't believe there's any negative ongoing impacts of colonisation on Indigenous Australians today? Just to confirm.
No, there's no ongoing negative impacts of colonisation.
So the Resolve poll referenced Ms Price's comments and asked, on the whole, do you think the impact of colonisation since 1788 has been a positive or negative for Indigenous people? It found 38% of people found it had been positive, 23% negative, but another 38% saying unsure or mixed. But when asked whether colonisation has resulted in intergenerational trauma for Indigenous people, and saying this is what the Yes camp was saying, the poll found 40% of people believed it had, 22% believed it had not, and 32% were unsure. The full Resolve polling report also shows that a majority of 58% of Australians are in favour of constitutional recognition of Indigenous people, without a voice necessarily being attached, just 27% against and 15% undecided. Among Yes supporters, that's 83%, surprising it's not 100, 5% no, 12 undecided. And support for constitutional recognition alone amongst no voters, 38%, 45 no, 17 undecided. The Resolve polling report finds this, quote, the ongoing uplift in the no vote has coincided with growing awareness and understanding of the referendum vote and proposal. The inescapable conclusion is that the more Australians have seen and heard of this debate and the more they've engaged, the more they've been turned off by the proposition. It goes on to say there is empathy for Indigenous disadvantage and a want for action to close the gap, but it must be wanted by those it seeks to help. It says high-profile Indigenous campaigners, Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, have personified the message that not all Indigenous people want this voice. And it concludes, while a turnaround to a yes result is not impossible by 14th of October, the referendum date on this Saturday, the scale and immediacy of the task is so vast as to make the prospect hardly worth of mention. On The Voice, more Australians believe it's an important, significant change. 44% see it that way, 23% see it as a small, modest change, 32% undecided. Asked which campaign people think are performing better, people felt no had done better, 42 to 24, 34 undecided. In terms of whether corporate involvement was seen as appropriate, 29% agreed, 44 disagreed, 26 were unsure. And on whether there should be more national single-issue votes decided at a referendum like this, the majority of Australians believe yes, we should continue with this practice, 52%. Now, when it came to comments from voters that the pollster received, there was good and bad news in there for both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. These are some of the comments about The Voice and politics the pollsters received. Labor are too focused on the yes-no referendum vote. There are more pressing matters. As a rusted-on Labor voter, I'm going against everything I believe to vote for Dutton because of The Voice. Another respondent, I've had enough of Albo's obsession with The Voice, just get on with governing. Another, Dutton actually seems to be making more sense. But then another, on the other side of the coin, says, I think he, Albanese, has a social conscience and he's doing his best to look at the most vulnerable. Another says Albanese appears to have the nation's interests at heart. Another says of Dutton, he's handled the Voice debate pretty poorly. He hasn't provided an alternative platform. Perhaps a lesson there why they're talking regional voices in the second referendum. Another says Dutton reflexively disagrees with any social change, like The Voice. But another says, all this money being spent on The Voice and he can't even tell us the implications. They're talking about Albanese. Further, Labor's achieving nothing and going nowhere like The Voice. Labor's doing some things that might not be popular but are for the good of the country. But another respondent says the way the coalition have responded to The Voice has left me less likely to vote for them. So reasons yes voters support The Voice include this, quote, Indigenous people have been discriminated against and disadvantaged through history, quote, we stole their land and this is giving something back so we can come together. It's not perfect, but it's better than doing nothing. In terms of comments against The Voice in this poll, they include this. This is going to be a complete waste of time and money. It's not going to work. Then this. This is Labor trying to distract everyone from their failure to address living costs. Then this. It's a wedge gone wrong. That's an interesting political phrase in a focus group, isn't it? It says it's completely backfired on Albo. Another talks about the refusal to provide more detail and says, a respondent says they're being very shady about it all. Why don't they answer basic questions? Another says everyone should be treated the same. It's central to Australian values. And yet another says, well, they've got an Aboriginal minister as well as several Aboriginal MPs. And there's the old saying that we've heard around the place, they already have enough privileges and money spent on them. They don't appreciate it. So, Kieran, you can see there some pretty interesting findings out of that result poll. We've seen some findings in the Herald and Age newspapers. I've got the 100-page report I've been mining for this report. But we can see there in the politicians' messages some of those key messages from those focus group type responses from voters.
You sure can. Andrew, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.